So this week we have a Colts versus Packers matchup. The big question being, will Jordan Love play? Odds are he probably doesn't. He hasn't officially been ruled out at this point. Matt LaFleur has technically left the door open, saying he's day-to-day. I just doubt he actually plays. He technically has a chance to play. And so in this prediction, I'm going to go with Malik Willis starting at quarterback. If that's not the case, then this Packers offense will be much, much better if Jordan Love, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, starts versus the Colts. If you guys are new here, I put up Packers content nearly every day, so feel free to subscribe. I will also be live tweeting the game on Sunday, so if you want to see my thoughts during the game, what's going on, you can follow me on Twitter at LukeBeller3. I'll also link that in the comment section or the description down below. I also share some stats, some film over there as well if you'd like to check that out. But this is going to be a pretty fun matchup. The Colts had a really great game last week. They did lose, but it was 29 Texans, 27 Colts. And I do believe the Texans are probably one of the better teams in the NFL, facing off one of the best quarterbacks, young quarterbacks in the league in C.J. Stroud. And Anthony Richardson is an insane talent, and so it's going to be a lot for the Packers to handle. But I want to start off on the Packers offensive side of the ball. And of course, the big question here is Malik Willis and how he is going to look. The Packers traded for him about 3 weeks ago, so he doesn't have too much time in this Matt LaFleur Packers offense. The Packers didn't trust Sean Clifford or Michael Pratt, which is why they made the move for Malik Willis. And we just don't have too much information to go off of for Malik Willis. Only started in 3 games back in 2022 when he was drafted. Didn't start last year, threw maybe 4 or 5 passes last season. And in his 3 starts in Tennessee, he was pretty inconsistent, threw 0 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. And coming out of college, he was a guy where you could see the upside he had, the athleticism, his arm strength, his ability to extend plays, his ability to run. And I would assume that his legs and running the ball is something the Packers will try to utilize in this game against the Indianapolis Colts. And one thing with the Packers is if you look at that Week 1 matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, the Packers ran the ball very, very well. And so you would assume with your star quarterback not playing that you'd do your best to really get the ground game going, focus on the run. If we take a look at the Packers rushing attack Week 1, they had the 8th most rushing yards in the NFL, first in rush yards per play at 7.8, first in EPA per rush. So they were playing really, really well. Josh Jacobs averaged a little over 5 yards a carry. Emmanuel Wilson had, I think, 4 carries for 46 yards. And then, of course, you had the Jaden Reed carry. I think it was for 33 yards for a touchdown. And so there's no doubt the Packers are going to get this running game going. And if you look at the Colts defense in Week 1 against the Texans, the run defense was not good. They allowed the most rushing yards in the NFL, 213. The 5th most rush yards per play. Joe Mixon had an insane day, 30 carries for 159 yards at 5.3 yards a carry. And I know Joe Mixon has gotten a little bit older, and I was thinking him going out to Houston. It's such a great offense that I still thought he could be productive. But watching that Colts and Texans game, he looks really, really good. And I think the thing is for the Packers, this Colts defense, their defensive line, really solid pass rush. They were causing a lot of problems all day for C.J. Stroud. The run defense was another story. There are a lot of big, wide-open holes. Joe Mixon did a good job of, finding the open lanes, making some nice cutbacks to, get his average up to 5.3 yards a carry. And I do think the Packers are going to be able to run the ball against this Colts defense. You look at the Packers' offensive line in Week 1. They were 7th in PFF pass block grade. They were also, when you look at the run blocking, 11th in PFF run blocking grade. I think they started off a little bit sloppy, but near the end of the game, they were playing really well, and the fact that they led the league in Week 1 in rush yards per play shows what this Packers offense has the ability to do when it comes to running the ball. And that's not even factoring in what Malik Willis could do on the ground. I would assume that we'll see some read options more so than we would ever see with Jordan Love, because while Jordan Love does have that ability to use his legs, he really doesn't do it too often. He only uses his legs when he really needs to. And I think when you pay a quarterback, $55 million a year, and his legs aren't typically, him running the ball isn't really one of his strong suits. Not that he can't do it, they just don't really do it too often with Jordan Love. But I think with Malik Willis, we'll see some more quarterback design runs just because That's one thing that we know he's very, very good at. He's an insanely talented athlete, and I would assume we'll see the Packers utilize that as well. And what it really comes down to in this game, if Malik Willis is 100% the starter, is him just not making a lot of, bad reads, bad throws. We just can't have a game where he comes in and throws, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. It's tough to win games like that. So I would assume the Packers try to dial up a lot of the quick passing game, a lot of screens, a lot of RPOs, a lot of try to focus on running the ball. And if it works, keep doing that, keep feeding that. Because when you have a young, inexperienced quarterback, you don't want to put too much on his shoulders, especially in a new offense. And so it comes down to, Malik Willis, and also, how has he developed since his first season in the NFL? Has he taken strides forward when it comes to his decision-making, when it comes to his accuracy? Because that was definitely something that wasn't great in his time at Tennessee. And so we're going to figure that out on Sunday. And he does have a big arm, and so it's not like he can't throw the ball and make big plays like that. He was just pretty inconsistent with his ball placement and his accuracy. But this is a Packers receiver room where you have, I'd say, one of the deepest rooms in the NFL. Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, who had a massive day in week 1, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Bo Melton. There's a lot of weapons here to, really help Malik Willis in this game, and it's going to be an interesting one to watch. If we look at the total Colts offense, they were 29th in points allowed in week 1, 31st in yards allowed. They had the 11th most pass yards allowed. They were 7th worst in EPA per pass allowed. You do have to factor in, it was the Houston Texans, who I think are going to have one of the best offenses in the NFL this season. And it's only 1 week, so it's not like, I don't necessarily think this Colts defense is going to be one of the worst in the league, even though looking at the total stats from week 1, that's sort of what it looks like. I think that they have, as I already mentioned, a very good pass rush. You look at their pressure rate in week 1, they had the 9th highest pressure rate at 36.8%. And as I was watching back the game earlier today, they were causing a lot of problems back there in the pocket for CJ Stroud. And CJ Stroud, such a talented quarterback, really accurate passer. He had some, miscues back there, but all in all, he's really good when it comes to his decision-making, when it comes to his ball placement. But with Malik Willis back there, if he consistently faces pressure, it's going to be interesting to see sort of how he responds. Is he going to make some bad reads, make some bad throws, throw some interceptions? I would assume he uses his legs a little bit just because he has that ability to escape the pocket. And I think we'll see some of that coming in to this game. Luckily for Malik Willis, the Packers offensive line, I still think is one of the best in the NFL. You look at some stats, 7th best PFF pass block grade week 1, 6th best pressure rate allowed week 1. The Packers were blitzed at the 8th highest rate in week 1. Jordan Love is pretty good against the blitz. Of course, it could be different with Malik Willis. So a lot of questions on the Packers front just because of Malik Willis, but I think because of their running game, they should be able to get things going in this game, even with a young, inexperienced quarterback. Now moving to the other side of the ball. The Packers defense was one of the big question marks coming to this year, just with uncertainty, because when you lose one defensive coordinator in Joe Barry and move to Jeff Hafley, there's just questions about sort of how he's going to operate, what he's going to do. And if we look at that week 1 matchup against the Eagles, reading as well through some quotes from Kenny Clark and I can't remember who else, but it was definitely Kenny Clark. They talked about their game plan, and the game plan against Jalen Hurts was to basically contain him with their pass rush. They weren't trying as hard to sort of get on the outside around to come down on Jalen Hurts. It was mainly keeping an eye on the quarterback and not letting him break away from the pocket. That was clearly their focus, and Kenny Clark said the plan was to make Jalen Hurts beat the Packers with his arm, which he did a lot of the day. He did throw a couple interceptions, but he still had a very good day. When it came to offense, the Packers allowed the 3rd most points in week 1, 34. The 4th most yards allowed, 410. They were 20th in EPA per play. They allowed the 6th most pass yards in week 1, 8th most pass yards per play. So that strategy did work for the most part when it came to containing Jalen Hurts. He had some runs later in the 4th quarter, but before that, he didn't really do too much. He didn't destroy the Packers on the ground with his legs. And I'm curious to see if the Packers deploy the same strategy, because it is a similar type quarterback in Anthony Richardson. And I honestly think Anthony Richardson is more dangerous on the ground than Jalen Hurts. I think he's a better athlete. He's just so gifted athletically. And so I would assume, especially when you look at Anthony Richardson in week 1, he had some insane plays. Like I'm talking like all time, that deep ball he had to Alec Pierce where he's fallen back and it's basically off his back foot. He throws it, I think it was like 60 plus yards. One of the craziest throws I've ever seen. He may have the strongest arm in the entire NFL. And there's no doubt he can make plays like that. He can do it on the ground with his legs. He can do it in the air with his arm. But I still think he's somewhat inconsistent when it comes to his ball placement. If you look at his completion percentage over expected, it was 20th in the NFL in week 1. And there were a good amount of plays where he missed a wide open guy. And so if I had to guess, I would say that the Packers deploy a similar plan, trying to keep Anthony Richardson in the pocket, sort of keep an eye on him. There are lots of times Kenny Clark week 1, as he's rushing, you can see him sort of sit back a little bit. And instead of trying to, get to Jalen Hurts, he was more so making sure that he wasn't breaking out of the pocket inside or outside. So because of what Anthony Richardson can do with his legs, I feel like we'll see the Packers utilize that, especially because I still think at this point, Richardson is still not the passer that Jalen Hurts is, just when it comes to his accuracy. Hurts did have some bad plays in week 1, but if you look at his completion percentage over expected, I believe it was 8th in week 1. And so Anthony Richardson still trying to improve in that accuracy, and I think the Packers may try to do a similar thing and try to hold Anthony Richardson back there in the pocket. One thing I'd like to see more of is the Packers actually getting pressure back there, but I think when you're utilizing that strategy of just trying to contain the quarterback and not allowing your defensive ends to really get up the field and do anything possible to beat their guy and just sort of bull rushing and keeping the quarterback in the pocket, I think it can limit what they can do when it comes to getting that pressure. And in week 1, Jalen Hurts, he had the second longest time to throw. He had a ton of time back there in the pocket. So I am curious to see if Jeff Hafley does deploy the same plan. I would guess he does, but we'll have to see come Sunday. Also, if we look at the Packers and their blitz rate in week 1, they had a blitz rate of 17.1%, which I think was pretty close to, it was actually 27th in the NFL in week 1. So they weren't really blitzing at a high rate, and I thought coming into the season, the way that Jeff Hafley was talked about, that we would see a lot more of that. At least in week 1, that wasn't the case. I don't know if they were nervous that setting the blitz that maybe Jalen Hurts could beat them. He struggled last year, was a lot better week 1 when it came to facing the blitz. But Hafley was willing to send a lot of pressure on third downs. He sent Keyshawn Nixon on either slot corner, Keyshawn Nixon on either 2 or 3 blitzes. So he's not afraid to do it in certain situations, and that's only 1 week. And so maybe this week he thinks that sending more pressure, sending more blitzes could affect Anthony Richardson more than Jalen Hurts. That's a possibility. So that's another thing to watch in this game. And I do think the Colts have a pretty solid offensive line. They have the best PFF run blocking grade in week 1. And so that's going to be something to watch. Can the Packers get more pressure this week than they did last week against Jalen Hurts? And if we look at the Colts and their rushing attack in week 1, 19th in rush yards, 12th in rush yards per play at 4.7, 3rd in EPA per rush. And they do have Jonathan Taylor, who I think is a solid running back. Didn't really go off in week 1. Also, Anthony Richardson, as we mentioned earlier, he's such a threat with his legs and what he's able to do on the ground. He honestly may be the most physically gifted and talented quarterbacks in the NFL. He ran the ball 6 times for 56 yards in week 1 at 9.3 yards a carry and 1 touchdown. So that's something the Packers really are going to need to try to hold him to minimal gains on the ground. And I think, as I already talked about, trying to contain him, I think we could see a similar strategy there. And when we look at the Colts and their receivers, they have some really talented receivers. Alec Pierce, an insane deep threat. And a couple times in week 1, Anthony Richardson was willing to just chunk it up to Alec Pierce. And so I think when you look last week, the Packers in the air weren't very good. Jair got beat a ton by A.J. Brown. I don't think the Colts have an A.J. Brown type talent, a guy who I think is probably in the top 5 of wide receivers, but they have a lot of talented weapons. Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce. I also think Adonai Mitchell is very talented. I saw that he had one of the best average, I think it was like yards of separation per play in the NFL in week 1. Somewhere in the top 10 per, I think, fantasy points in their data over there. So they got a lot of talented players, and the Packers corners are definitely going to have their hands full And I want to see if Jair can have a bounce back day after getting beat a lot by A.J. Brown in week 1. I do think a lot of that had to do with the field conditions because the guys were slipping all over the entire day. And I think it's going to be a lot better this week. And so all in all, it just comes down to, what the Packers can do. Can they get pressure consistently on Anthony Richardson? Can they force him to make some bad decisions and win the turnover battle? Because if Malik Willis starts, the defense really needs to play at a much higher level. Because if Jordan Love is out there, the Packers could have a pretty bad day in defense and still almost win the game, which is what happened last week. The Packers defense allowed some of the most points in the NFL, some of the most yards, and still were within striking distance at the end of that game to potentially win it against the Eagles. Jordan Love had a beautiful pass to the outside. Then he, of course, gets injured. Malik Willis comes in, can't get the Hail Mary off. So the Packers were pretty close to having a chance to win that game, and that's because Jordan Love, when you have an elite quarterback, he really allows you to stay in games even if your defense isn't playing well. But with a very young, inexperienced quarterback in Malik Willis, it's definitely that much more important for the Packers defense to show up on Sunday to give this Packers offense a chance and not, make it be too much on their shoulders if Willis does start. And so my prediction for this game, my score prediction, is going to be Packers 24, Colts 21. This is a home game in Lambeau Field. I think the Packers will be able to force some turnovers like they did in week 1. And I think that the Packers rushing attack can do enough to, make it a little bit easier for Malik Willis. So that's my score prediction, 24-21. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.